Today's stuff we're going to be learning is Bava Kamma Daf Kuf Gimel. We're going to start with a quick review. Felt like I wasn't clear about the whole flow at the end of yesterday's sugya, so I want to just go through it very quickly. You can also see it in the summary of yesterday's daf. I kind of clarified it after class. We started with this contradiction of braitot at the top of Kuf Bet and Bet. Then we said maybe one's Rabbi Meir, Rabbi Yochanan suggested one is Rabbi Meir, one is Rabbi Yehuda. Then we had a second explanation of Rabbi Elazar. What are you talking about? And I can explain them both according to Rabbi Meir. And that opinion we're not going to go back to, so I'm going to leave that aside. Then we had this problem. The rabbis in Israel said something doesn't make sense in Rabbi Yochanan's approach, because in this case, now let's remind us of the case. You send someone to buy you something and they come back with the wrong item, right? Happens all the time. And what happened here? Now, if the price went up in value, then the messenger, the agent, has to split the proceeds 50-50, okay? All the extra amount. To which the rabbis in Israel said, that's according to Rabbi Yehuda. According to that explanation, something doesn't make sense, they said, because how could, let's say it's me, I sent you to buy me wheat and you bought me barley, and now the barley went up in price and you have to split the proceeds with me. Now, if you didn't buy what I asked you to buy, and the one who you sold it to had no idea that I was in the picture, well, they basically gave it to you, and you're not doing my shlichut. Okay, I'm explaining their question after Rabbi Akiva basically fine-tuned it and said that if you were doing what I asked you to do, then shlucho shel adam kemoto, you could act as my agent, and the seller doesn't need to know about me. It could still be mine. But if you change and do something different and don't do what I asked you, so you're not my agent anymore. If you're not my agent and there's no way, and the seller doesn't know that I'm in the picture, there's no way that ownership can be transferred to me. That's their issue, and that's their claim. And that's what we're going to talk about today. Just to go through the flow a little bit to make it very clear, because I felt like it wasn't clear enough yesterday. We then had this small question on it, which says basically no time can an agent be doing this if the seller doesn't know about the original person, to which Rabbi Akiva explained, as I already said, we're going to distinguish between if the agent is doing the job right versus if the agent isn't doing the job right. And that's his distinction. Then, and now the whole rest of the sugya is in parentheses, basically, because what they do after that is that Rabbi Akiva brings a proof from this Mishna about the Makdish Nechasav, where you sanctified all your value, everything, all your possessions. And if you gave your value to the temple, use that as a proof that here you see, he can give things, right? The man can bring the dye to the seller, to the dyer, the wool to the dyer. And sorry, I said the dye, I meant the wool. For his wife, even though the guy has no idea that he's doing it for the wife, and it can belong to the wife, and therefore it wouldn't be sanctified. And that was his proof. To which Rabbi Akiva basically rejects this proof and says, that can't be the reason, it's a different reason. Then we brought two difficulties against Rabbi Akiva. The second one is accepted, and that's Rabbi Akiva's rejection of Rabbi Akiva's proof. And Rabbi Akiva then gives a different reason why he rejects this as a proof. Okay, he modifies his answer. So in the end, what we had was the rabbis in Israel, their statement. We have Rabbi Akiva's explanation of it. We have Rabbi Akiva's difficulty with Rabbi Akiva's proof. And basically what we did is we knocked out the proof in the end. Even though Rabbi Akiva, there were some issues with him, Rabbi Akiva fine-tunes it and eventually knocks out the proof. But just because he knocked out the proof doesn't mean that Rabbi Akiva's answer doesn't stand. He just doesn't have a proof. That's where we ended. Okay, I just wanted to clarify that. You can look at it back inside now. Yeah. Now we're moving on, but we're not really moving on because the next two sugyot, until we get to the next Mishna, have to do with statements that we're going to bring. The first one, we're going to suggest that it goes against the rabbis in Israel. And then we're going to say, no, you didn't understand the source properly. And it has nothing to do with it. And then we're going to try to suggest with the story where Rav paskins in a particular case to Rav Kahana, a particular thing. We're going to think that Rav agrees with the rabbis in Israel, and then we're going to reject that as well and say, no, this had nothing to do with it. Okay, so that's what we're going to do until we get to the whole next Mishna, which is a whole new topic. So it's a simple structure, but there's a lot in it to get through. So here goes our braita. It's a very strange braita. Halokach sadeh b'shem chavero. People always go and say, I have a question for a friend, when really it's for them and they just don't want to say so. So here we have a person who buys land. Now, it's not going to be the same, but I just brought it because I thought of it. But somebody goes and buys land for someone else when it's really for them. Okay, we'll see in a minute why on earth someone would do this. But you purchase a field. Okay, so I purchase a field from you. And I write and I say, but I'm really purchasing it for someone else. Okay, so now, ein kofino tolim kol. We don't force him to sell. Okay, we don't know who the him is. We don't know what this means. But there's two parts to this, and this is going to be important for the flow of the Gemara. V'im amarlo almanat kofino tolim kol. But if that was part of the deal, then we do force him to sell it. Okay, we don't know what they're talking about. My Kamma. So the Gemara says, what on earth does this source mean? Amar Rav Sheshet, hachi Kamma. Rav Sheshet says, this is what this means. Halokech sadeh, but right, if it wasn't clear, we're starting 10 lines from the bottom of, around 10 lines from the bottom of Kuf Ben Amud Ben. Halokech sadeh mechavero b'shem reish galuta. I buy a field from you. Now we're going to find out who I bought it in the name of the exilarch, who was a big, powerful man. Why did I do that? So Rashi explains to us, well, I didn't want people to start claiming, right? What happens when you buy land is sometimes people come and say, what are you talking about? That land doesn't belong to you. That land was mine. You can't sell it to Michelle. It's not your land. So if you say you're buying it for the Reish Galuta, no one's going to start coming forward and making a big deal about it because they're scared of the Reish Galuta. The Reish Galuta will basically, he was a big, powerful political leader. You're not going to start up with him. So that's why I said I'm buying it for the Reish Galuta. Okay, so the same way I might lie to you and say I have a question for a friend because I'm embarrassed to ask the question about myself. I don't want you to know personal details about myself. Same way here, again, it's different, but I'll say it's in the name of someone else, even though it's really for me. Now here, obviously you have a problem, which is in the end, I'm going to have a deed for this house without my name on it. So that's the issue of, can we force or not force someone to sell, and who are we going to force to sell? What does this mean? So let's explain. Ein kofino toresh galuta limkor. After I buy the field from you and the document's written in the name of the Reish Galuta, I can't go to the Reish Galuta and say, listen, can you write me a document that says you gave me the field and put it into my name? I can't force Reish Galuta to do that. Seems pretty obvious. Why would Reish Galuta do that for me? Ve'im amal al menat, but if that was part of the deal, kofinit Reish Galuta limkor. This is a fascinating thing. If I made a deal with you and I said, listen, it's for Reish Galuta, but this whole thing is premised on the fact that the Reish Galuta will eventually write a document for me, then I can go force Reish Galuta to sell it, to basically write me a new document. Okay, we're going to eventually reject this because this makes no sense. There's no way I could force Reish Galuta to do this. So we'll get back to there in a minute. So first I'm going to deal with the first line. This was Rav Sheshet's explanation. Soon it's going to be rejected. But why did we bring this? Because we'll see right now. Amar Mar. So now we're going to go back to the first line of the braita according to Rav Sheshet's explanation. Amar Mar. Okay, so again, I buy the field and name Reish Galuta. We can't force Reish Galuta to sell it to me. Now, what do you see here? Now, this is what's relevant to our purposes. From here, what do you see? Why don't we force Reish Galuta? Because I can prove this is my land anyway. This land is my land. Okay, that's singing the song. This land is clearly my land. Now, why? Well, this would seem lema pliga d'bnei Rava. Sounds like this goes against the people in Israel because Amre, what did they say? What did I do? I went to you and I said, I'm buying this land for the Reish Galuta. What did you think? That you were selling it to the Reish Galuta, not to me. And yet it's mine. So what do you see? It's exactly what we said. Now, it's a little different. There's no agent here, but I'm basically operating for myself, but you don't know that. You think I'm buying it for the Reish Galuta, right? I've duped everybody. And yet it works for me, even though you really were giving the rights to the Reish Galuta, not to me. So it looks like it doesn't matter what you intended or not. And that goes against the rabbis in Israel. But we're going to totally reject this. Imishum halo kasha. Why are we going to reject it? First, we're going to reject this assumption we're assuming. And then we're going to reject Rav Sheshet's explanation altogether. But that's going to be the second stage. So what's the issue? Kigon, because it's really a case, why would this work? And we can say, why would the yes fit with the rabbis in Israel? Kigon de ode labal sadeh v'odinu l'sadeh. Who was I trying to dupe? I wasn't trying to dupe you. I was trying to dupe the world. I was trying to dupe all the other people in the community who are going to now go claim this land is ours. But I told you, and I told the witnesses, they all knew you were selling it to me. It was just we wrote in the document, Reish Galuta, so that when it got publicized, people wouldn't start making a big deal. But you knew who you were selling it to, in which case this is irrelevant for the rabbis of Israel because it's not the case they were talking about. They were talking about a case where you didn't know who you were selling it to. Okay, so we've rejected the suggestion that Rav Sheshet disagrees with the rabbis of Israel. Ela ema seifa, but wait a minute. Something about Rav Sheshet's explanation makes absolutely no sense. It says, al minat, if we had an agreement that we were going to change it into my name, kofino to Reish Galuta linkor. So we forced the Reish Galuta to write me a new document, to which the Gemara says, Amai. Why? The lema Reish Galuta, lo yikaraychu, this is a great line, lo yikaraychu bina, velo zilutaychu bina. I don't need your respect. In other words, the fact that you respect me enough that you use my name to basically, you knew my name would scare people. You obviously think I have a lot of clout. I don't need that. And I don't need your demeaning me. You're going to demean me now to basically go and write you a new document because you were using me to do this? Thanks, but no thanks. I don't have anything to do with this. Why are you using me for this kind of thing? So they reject Rav Sheshet's explanation because it makes no sense. Ela Amar Abai, second explanation. And again, we're done with our sugya because all we brought this was to show that Rav Sheshet disagrees with the rabbis in the Bnei Ma'arav, those rabbis in Israel. Okay, but we're done with that because number one, we rejected the thought that he disagreed with them. That's not the case. And number two, we just said his whole explanation doesn't make any sense. So Ela Amar Abai. But in the meantime, let's just understand this braita. And I have in parentheses Reish Galuta. Some people think it's the Reish Galuta. Some people think it's not. Either which way, it means the same thing. You use someone's name, someone else's name, because they were more powerful than you. And now we're getting finally to the top of Kuf Gimel. And kofinet hamocher linkor zimna acharite. Okay, we don't force the seller to write you a new document. In other words, the thought would be, you had him write you a document first in the name of, let's say, the Reish Galuta. And that way that got out. No one complained. At that point, you could write another document. No one's even going to hear about it. Or if they do, they already didn't complain. They can't come forward and complain now. And you've accomplished what you wanted. But you still can't force them to write you a new document. You can't force, now it's not the Reish Galuta here. You can't force the seller to write you a new document. But imamarlo al minad. Now, once we switch the subject to the seller, it makes a lot more sense. If we did the deal in the way that you promised that you would write me a new document, like I said, I'll buy it from you under the condition that first we write it in the name of the Reish Galuta, then we write it in my name, kofina tamocher linkor. Then we force him to sell. On this explanation of buy, we're going to have two questions, one on the first part, one on the second part, and each of the questions is going to be, isn't this obvious? And then they're going to have to explain why it wasn't so obvious, because it is pretty obvious, right? If I told you it was writing in the name of the Reish Galuta, how on earth can I force you to write me a new document? And number two, if I made you commit that you were writing a new document, of course I could force you to write a new document. So the whole thing seems obvious. They don't really need to tell you this. To which they explain the following. So first we're going to go to the beginning, ask the Pshita question, then we're going to go to the second part and ask the Pshita. So first they're just quoting the first part. If you buy a field in the name of your friend, you don't force the seller, this is Abaya's reading of it, to sell zimna acharite, to basically write you a new document in your name. To which they say, Pshita, isn't this obvious? It might be that I could claim, listen, you know that I bought this for myself. And all I was doing was just trying to save myself from people taking the land away from you, which was also in your best interest, by the way. And I would never put money down for no reason. In other words, if now everyone's going to think it belongs to the Reish Galuta, I certainly wouldn't put a down payment on a house for somebody else when I get nothing out of it. Which therefore means it was totally obvious from the beginning that if I was doing this, I was obviously going to make you write me a new document. Kamma no. Therefore, in other words, it wasn't so obvious that you don't have to write a new shtar, because maybe I could claim, wasn't it implicit in what I was doing that I would ask you to eventually write it in my name? Well, comes the braita and says, no. Da Amarle, you could claim to me, in Yana Abdelach Bahadacha, who dezabna b'shmei, v'yichtav lach shtar achrina. No, Your issue now is with the Reish Galuta. Go ask the Reish Galuta to write you a new shtar. What do I have to do it for? You could claim, right? This is between you and the Reish Galuta now. You have a document in his name. Go deal with him. And therefore, you don't have to do it. However, in Marlo Almanat, Kofino told him court, right? But if it was part of the stipulation, then yes. So now the Gemara is going to say that also is pshita, is obvious. Well, lo tzricha, you need it for the following case. If I went in front of the witnesses and in front of you, and I said, Chazu dishtara acharina kabina. Okay, the stipulation is I need another shtar. But notice how I said it. I didn't say you need to write me a new shtar on account that you'll write me a new shtar. I just said I'm doing this deal, but I'm going to need a second shtar written. But I didn't say who. So now it's not so obvious because Ma'u Detema, you might have thought they could say Matzei Amarle. Amina shtar mehach de kashakel mishmei kamar. I thought you were saying you're going to get a shtar after this. I thought you were just telling us, oh, by the way, just so you know, right? I'm buying this, but I'm going to get another shtar from the Reish Galuta that puts it into my own name. And maybe they could get away with saying that and not have to write you a new shtar. But right here, by the way, it's irrelevant what the Reish Galuta is going to do. This is all just, does the other side have a claim and say, I thought you were going to get it from them, right? Even though we said already, it's ridiculous that you would get it from them. It doesn't matter. They could still claim it. Like, what do we have to do with it? That's why it comes to teach you no. In that case, where I stipulated it while we were doing the deal in front of you and the witnesses, I can make a claim to Amarle, lahachi tarche ba'armaluhu le'idim kamach. Why do you think I told it to you in front of the witnesses? I obviously said this not just shooting the breeze with you and telling you what I plan to do after I buy the house and how I plan to renovate it and what I plan to do with it. No, I was telling you because I meant you're the ones who were going to do it. Fine, I forgot to say the words. You are going to write me a new shtar, but it was obvious I did it in front of you and the witnesses in order that you know that this is part of the stipulation. So then I have a claim. And that's why it wasn't so obvious. That's the deal. Okay, so what we did again, we brought this braita thinking that within Rish Lakit, within Rav Shesha, I keep accidentally saying Rish Lakit, between the Reish Galuta and the Rav Shesha and all this, they all sound the same. It's blurring in my mind. But what do we have? Rav Sheshet's explanation, we thought disagreed with the rabbis in Israel. In the end, we said not only, first, number one, it doesn't disagree with them. Number two, we reject his whole opinion as it is. And then we brought a bias explanation, which had nothing to do at all with the rabbis in Israel and their opinion. Okay, now we're going to get to the second story. Remember, the rabbis in Israel say, if I send you to do something and you do it differently, then how on earth could I get half the proceeds if the seller never knew who I was and you didn't do what I asked you to do? So here we have a story with Rav Kahana. Rav Kahana yav zuze akitana. He paid money for flax. The assumption is, okay, now what happened? So he buys flax from somebody. But, okay, sometimes this happens. You go into a store and then you're planning to do a lot of errands. So you buy the food and then you leave it in the store and then you come back later for it. So he went to the store, let's say, he picked up the flax, did a kinyan, acquired it. That's what we're going to think originally. Then we're going to change it. But right now we're going to think that he picked up the flax, but then left it there and said, I'll come back later and get it. Okay? So the flax is his. But what happens? He doesn't get it 5 minutes later, okay, or when he finished his errands. He gets it, I don't know, let's just say a month later. But he doesn't actually end up with his flax because what happens? L'sof iyakir kitana. Now he leaves it in the hands of Ruth, let's say. Okay, we'll go back to Ruth. So let's say it's, okay, Rav Kahana buys his flax from Ruth. And l'sof iyakir kitana. Well, while the flax is still in Ruth's possession, but remember, who owns the flax? Rav Kahana, because Rav Kahana did a kinyan. So it's Rav Kahana's flax sitting in Ruth's house. Now, Ruth, in this case, is actually very good. What does she say? She says, the price of flax went up. I can do something good for Rav Kahana. Instead of the flax being worth a zuz, now the flax is worth, let's just say, a zuz and a half. So Zabne Marvata de Kitana, the owner of the flax, the original owner of the flax, which is Ruth, goes and sells the flax for more money and gets a zuz and a half and goes and gives it to Rav Kahana. Now, something about this doesn't look right because Rav Kahana gave Ruth a zuz and took back a zuz and a half. Now, that looks like there was a loan going on and Rav Kahana received 1.5 for that one zuz of a loan. looks like interest. So Atal Kamei de Rav, Amarle, Maya, Rav Kahan's a good guy. Okay, he says, listen, Rav, what am I supposed to do? Ezel Ishkal Zuzai, can I take the money? Or does it look like interest? Amarle. So here comes Rav, and this is going to be the point that connects with it. It all depends on, okay, now Ruth sold the flax to Naomi. What does it all depend on? Whether Naomi, okay, Rav is going to say whether Naomi knew about you, Rav Kahana. Did she know that it was you? Or did she think she was buying it from Ruth? Did she know that it was owned by you? So let's talk about it. Amrle. If Ruth went to Naomi and said to her, Hi, Kitana de Kahanahu, this is Kahana's, okay, this is Rav Kahana's flax. Then Zilshkol. If Naomi knew that it was yours, then no problem. Then basically, because remember, you did a kinyan, you lifted it, it was yours. Now, he doesn't say this, but that's implied. Since it was yours already, now if he hadn't done a kinyan, it wasn't even his yet. But if it was his already, and Ruth sells it and says, I'm selling Rav Kahana's, then basically Naomi's intent was, I'm giving it to Rav Kahana, in which case it's Rav Kahana's. There's no interest here. You're just getting your item back in the form of money. Okay? And it's now worth more. Great. That's not interest. VE low, but if not, if Ruth was doing it as if it was her own and Naomi had no idea, and Naomi thought she was giving it to Ruth, then when Ruth goes, gives it back to Rav Kahana, then it looks like interest. E low tishkol. If not, you can't take it. Kiman, so who is this like? Kibnei Rava sounds exactly like the rabbis in Israel. De Amre, who said, Mi hodio labal chitim sheknech chitim labal ma'ot. Right? It all depends on whether, right? Ruth is acting here without Rav Kahana's permission. So it's all dependent on whether Naomi knew or didn't know of Rav Kahana's existence here in the story and relevance. So is it Rav Kahana's or is it not? If she gave it back to Ruth as if this is owned by Ruth, even though it wasn't really owned by Ruth, but she gives it back to her with that intent, then Naomi never meant for it to be owned by Rav Kahana, in which case the money now is Ruth's, and Ruth is just returning, right? Ruth basically took the money of Rav Kahana and basically is returning the money to Rav Kahana, in which case it looks like interest. Now they're going to say, no way, no how. Okay, this is not the way to understand this, and you have a big problem here. Rav Kahana arba v'shakel tamne. Is this like a case where Rav Kahana gave 4 and got 8 back and it looks like interest? No, it's not. When Rav Kahana gets that money back from Ruth at the value of 1.5 instead of 1, it's not a repeat interchange. And we'll explain why in a second. Why does Ruth have to give back 1.5 to Rav Kahana in this case, if Naomi didn't know of Rav Kahana's existence? Because kitana mimelu hudi iyakir. First of all, the price just happened to go up. It wasn't like Ruth intended to give her more money back. The price went up on its own. Migzal gazluha. Now, when Ruth goes to Naomi and sells it, remember, it wasn't Ruth's to sell. It belongs to Rav Kahana. She happened to leave it in Ruth's store. He happened to leave it in Ruth's store and didn't take it. But it's Rav Kahana's, which means what? Let's go good review. When Ruth steals it, when did Ruth steal it? Not from day one when it was worth a zuz. Ruth stole it when she sold it to Naomi. How much was it worth then? 1.5. What are the rules about theft? When you steal it, you acquire it, and you have to pay at the amount it was worth at the time that you stole it. That's why she has to give back. Utnan, it says in the Mishna, Kol hagazlanim mishalmim keshad gezeila. So that's why Ruth has to return to Rav Kahana the amount, okay, at 1.5. Now, according to this, it should be irrelevant if Naomi knew about Ruth, about Rav Kahana, didn't know about Rav Kahana, and something doesn't jive here. Because what did Rav say? Rav said it all depends on whether Naomi intended to pass it on or didn't intend to pass it on. So this whole explanation doesn't make any sense. So we tried to say that this is exactly parallel to the rabbis in Israel. And since it all depends, as Rav said, on whether Naomi knew or didn't know, but then we said something here makes no sense at all, and we're going to have to switch the way we thought the case was. Okay, now the real problem lies in the fact that if Rav Kahana picked up the flax, if it's like I said, I went to the store and I just didn't want to take it that day, and I wanted to pick it up the next day, but I did a kinyan. And Rav Kahana came, lifted it. It was Rav Kahana's. Then, no matter what, Ruth's going to have to pay her the higher value. It shouldn't depend on what Naomi knew or didn't know, because that's irrelevant. Ruth stole. Fair, right? Plain and simple. She took something that didn't belong to her and she sold it. That's stealing. And therefore, you always have to pay the value was at the time of the theft, which would be 1.5, and there's no rebate. So they have to explain the case differently. Hatam amanahave. They say, okay, Amra, I skipped that word. Amra, hatam amanahave. What does this mean? It was more like a case that Rav Kahana went to the Ruth store to buy flax, and Ruth had none in stock. And Rav Kahana paid in advance and said, I'm paying for the flax, but never had a kinyan on the flax. The flax comes into stock. All of a sudden, Ruth says, and then Rav Kahana hasn't shown up to pick it up yet. No kinyan at all. And now the price goes up and Ruth decides to sell it. Now, at this point, the flax, there's no theft here because Ruth didn't steal it because it wasn't Rav Kahana's yet. First of all, right? Potentially all the flax in the store could be, Rav Kahana is going to come in and take some flax. It's not like this has a name on it in a way that it's really owned by Rav Kahana. So now it's a manahave. It was bought on credit. Vilo mashche Rav Kahana lekitana. And there was no mashicha. Until now, we thought there was mashicha. There was no mashicha. There was no kinyan, no acquiring. Now, why did Rav say then it all depends on whether Naomi knows about, right? That was the whole thing. Remember, we have to explain this now, which we thought connected with the rabbis in Israel. If Ruth said, I'm selling this for Rav Kahana, then it's Rav Kahana gets the money. If not, not. Now, why is this? Well, if she says, let's start with the first. If Ruth said, this really I'm giving to Rav Kahana, I'm selling it to you though, and I'm going to give Rav Kahana the money, then basically Ruth basically made this a sale of Rav Kahana's stuff. So even though Rav Kahana hadn't acquired it, she actually turned it into Rav Kahana's flax, in which case when she told Naomi, I'm selling you Rav Kahana's flax, it becomes Rav Kahana's, and she can just give him the money. But if she didn't say anything, now we're going to see, Rav L'tameh, Rav goes according to his own opinion, to Amarav, osim amana beperot, ve'ein osim amana bedamim. Let's take the situation otherwise. Let's say, what does this mean? I'm going to explain it all. There is amana in perot, but not in money. If in this case, okay, this happens all the time, you go online and you buy something and it's on sale. And then when you receive the item, it's no longer on sale, but you locked into that price. So you get it, right? Whether the price goes up or down, it doesn't matter. You locked into that price and you're going to get the item, even if the item is valued more or valued less. So if you order an item and it's very cheap, and the next day it's worth a lot more, when you get the item and it gets delivered to you the next day, there's no interest there because you ordered an item, you got an item. Even if the item is worth more, it's not like you gave a loan, you gave money, you got back more than what you put in. That's not considered interest. But if you ordered an item online and then you get money back, you have to get the same amount of money back that you gave, even if now the item's worth more. You don't get more money back. You don't get the price back the way it is now, right? You buy something on sale and then the next day it's not on sale. If you go return it, the store's not going to give you the higher price, right? And if they would and be nice about it, it's actually interest according to this, because you're getting back in money, right? You put in money and you're getting back more money. So if they give you money, they can't give you more money than what you put in. So that explains the case, in which case it has nothing to do at all with what we were talking about. It doesn't teach us anything about that Rav held like the rabbis in Israel. Okay, so basically we did so far, even though it took a long time, two sugyot, one Rav Sheshet's explanation of a braitot, which we thought had to do with it. He was going against the rabbis in Israel. And then we took Rav in his psika in this case with Rav Kahana. We thought that his ruling reflected that he agreed with the rabbis in Israel. It turns out it had nothing to do with it. It had to do with just laws of interest. Okay, new Mishna. Somebody steals, and it has to be a shava pruta. This goes back to Kiddushin about a shava pruta. Anything less than a pruta is just not worth enough. There's no obligation, the Torah obligation to return the item with, we're going to talk about it, with a chomesh, with an added fifth, which is really a quarter. We've talked about that before. I'm not going to get into that right now. And the asham gezeila, the korban that you have to bring with it. That's all only on something that's worth a pruta, number one. Number two, it's only a case where you took an oath that you stole it. If you didn't take an oath, then this halacha won't hold true. We'll talk about what exactly this halacha is. And it doesn't say so in the Mishnah, but it's obvious. Also, you admitted, okay? I'm not going to go into this because there's still a lot more to do today and we don't have a lot of time, but you can look at the study guide. I brought psukim from Vayikra and psukim from Bamidbar. Okay, I'll tell you in a nutshell, but you can look at it inside. The psukim in Vayikra, which we'll quote some of them, talk about someone who sins and denies a claim, and then whether it's a pikadon, okay, someone gave you something to watch, or whether it's a theft, and you deny it, okay, and then you swear about it. Then it talks about the chomesh and the pikad, right? You have to bring an added fifth, you have to return the item, added fifth, and the asham gezeila. That's where it really comes out. But in Bamidbar, Perek Hey, there's another section which talks about just general sinning. And then it uses the word ma'al, which also appeared in Vayikra. And there it says, and you admitted. So all the comment, Rashi there says, based on a Sifri, that this is a repeat of Vayikra. It's the same thing. I brought Rashi on the study guide, so you can read it there. It's a repeat of that situation. And it's coming to teach you two new laws. One, I'm not going to get into gezeila ger, which is a different topic. And one is that it teaches you that you only have to pay the fifth and the sacrifice when you come forward and admit that you lied. So we're basically talking about you stole, you swore falsely that you didn't steal, and then you come and admit that you did steal, which is different from a case where witnesses came and said you stole and caught you stealing. Then you just pay back the item. This added fifth and the asham is only if you come and admit. Why? Because when they come and say you stole, what's important? You have to return the item to the person you stole it from. When you want to do tshuva, because obviously if you're admitting you want to do tshuva, okay, because again, I want to be very clear. The psukim in Bamidbar said, v'hitvadu et chatatan, and you admitted you sinned, and then it talked about an asham. They say that's the same thing. In the vidoy, we're going to move also to the section in Vayikra and say that the only time you're obligated to all these things is if you swore falsely, and not that they caught you swearing falsely, but you admitted, because then you're looking for atonement. And this gets into, again, we don't have enough time to talk about this, but all the reasons for all these things. What's the point of having you do all this? So, well, the sacrifice is really to atone. And when do you want atonement? When do you get atonement? When you want atonement. If you don't want atonement, well, we're not going to give it to you. Then you just have to compensate the owner. But if you're looking for atonement, you have to do more than that. And now, so that's the background for this Mishnah. And you have to add the words en hoda, and you admitted, because that's the way it's all understood. Now, it's not enough to just do all this. The amount you write, return the object, pay the chomesh and the korban, the sacrifice, but it's not enough to just say here, I don't know, here's the item, do with it what you want. You have to go, even if, let's say, the guy lives far away in Madai, you have to bring it all the way to him there. Okay, the Kohen has a nice footnote if you have the Kohen about why Madai specifically. Anyway, I'm not going to get into that right now, but there's some explanation, it's a commentary. But the point is, you have to go out of your way to make sure it gets to the hands of the person you stole it from. Now, why? Again, if we're talking about the world of atonement, it's not enough to just say, okay, here's the stolen item. It's in my house, come get it. No, you have to go far, even possibly pay money to travel. Okay, you're in Israel, you stole it from someone in America, you got to go back to America to do it. Commentaries talk about it. It's a difference if, let's say, I was living in America, I stole it, and then I moved to Israel, and I want to return it, I have to go to America. If they moved to a different country, then maybe not on me. Okay, but those are details. So now they say, lo yitain lo lebeno v'lo l'shlucho, you can't give it to the son or to a messenger, or you can, but until it gets to the person, if something happens to it along the way, it gets lost, I'm responsible. I have to compensate. Avam noten l'shliach beitin, but they do say you could give it to a messenger of the court, and then already I'm relieved of responsibility. Okay, this is about when I have responsibility. Okay, this a little bit seems to contradict because we just said you have to give it to the person, but I don't know, I'm going to leave that a bit of an open question. If the person dies, you have to give it back to their heirs. Okay, they're not there. Well, you give it to their heirs. Again, there the commentaries say as long as you give it to one of them, you don't have to give it to all of them. Five of them live in 5 different places. You don't have to split it up 5 ways and get to all of them. What if you paid the principal? Now we're going to have to see, where does this halacha apply? To the principal or to the fifth, the added, or to both? So we're going to basically learn the whole premise of this next section is this whole thing about returning it directly to them and going out of your way to make sure it gets to them is only about the principle, not about the added fifth. So if you already gave the Karen, but you didn't pay the fifth, or machalo ala keren, machalo ala chomesh, the guy said, listen, you don't have to pay me the value of the item, just give me the added fifth for whatever reason. Machalo al zeh v'al zeh, chutz mi pachomish have a pruta b'keren. He said, you don't have to pay me the keren, you don't have to pay me the chomesh. The only thing you have to pay me is less than a pruta of the principal, like a little value, which isn't valued enough. Then you don't have to go find him or her. But what if you paid the fifth to the thief, to the guy you stole from, but you didn't yet pay the principal? Or the person who you stole from says, listen, you don't have to pay me the fifth, but yes, please pay me the original item. Or the person said, you don't have to pay me this, you don't have to pay me that. All you have to pay me is a pruta's worth of the principal. Then, as long as there's some part of the principal left that's worth a pruta, you have to give it to the person directly. What if you return the keren and then you don't return the chomesh, but you lie and swear falsely and say, I returned you the chomesh? Well, now the chomesh becomes the keren because now you've lied about owing something you owe, and now you pay a fifth on the fifth. And let's say you then pay the fifth back and then don't pay the other fifth. This is like half-lives, okay? You could continually have to pay an added fifth on that fifth, keep going and going every time you lie and deny, and then again, admit that you lied. Again, this would be a little absurd that this would happen, but as long as the chomesh, the fifth, doesn't get deducted to such a small amount, it's not even a sheva pruta anymore, you could have a case where the chomesh you're going to have to end up paying directly to them because the chomesh becomes the keren. That's an aside. The same all holds true if you ask me to watch something and I don't give it back to you, and I lie and I say it was stolen from me and it wasn't really, and then I admit, I lied, I really stole it from myself. All the same laws would be true, and this is based on that verse in Vayikra. O b'pikadon, o b'tzumet yad, o b'gezel, o ashaket amito, o matzah b'dav chekesh bar v'nishbal sheker. That's the pasuk. Okay, all sorts of things. We're going to get into this pasuk a lot more in the next few dapim. Harei mishalem keren v'chomesh v'asham. In all those cases, you're going to have to pay the keren, the chomesh, and the asham. Okay, all those things. Which again, if you don't take an oath, then you just have to return the item that you stole. But once you take an oath and then admit, and you want to do repentance, then you have to do this extra. So now the Gemara is going to have one main topic, which is the inference from our Mishnah, which is an obvious inference, is nishbalo in, lo nishbalo lo. This whole law that you have to get it to the hands of the person you stole it from is only if you took an oath and then admitted and you want to do this atonement, then you have to do that. But lo nishbalo, if you didn't take an oath and let's say witnesses came and said you stole, no, you can just say, okay, you can leave it in your house and say, here's the item, come take it. And you're fine. Okay, I didn't get into this, but most of them say when it comes to the asham, in the case where you have to do that, you can't bring the asham till the stolen item actually gets there because you can't ask for atonement till you're done with, giving it back. So now they're going to have a problem because they're going to say, and we're going to remember a Mishna we learned in Yevamot, very interesting case. Lo Rabbi Tarfon v'lo Rabbi Akiva. If you're going to make this distinction, nishba or lo nishba, and this can be our topic for today and through till tomorrow, doesn't seem to match Rabbi Tarfon, doesn't seem to match Rabbi Akiva. Okay, who's Rabbi Tarfon, who's Rabbi Akiva? Well, ditnan, it's a ditanya, it should be ditnan. It's a Mishna in Yevamot. Gazal echad mechamisha ve'ino yodea ezemeh. Okay, in Yevamot, there was a case with 5 women. He didn't know which one. Now we're talking about you stole from, that's how we got to this. You steal from one of 5 people, but you don't know who you stole from. You're not sure which of the 5. V'chol echad omer, oti gazal. And everyone claims, each of the 5, they stole from me. Okay, there's different explanations what exactly this means, but not for today. We'll go back and look at Yevamot Kufchet. But you put the thing down in the middle and you can leave. Okay, some people say it doesn't really mean that, but the point for our purposes is you do not have to get the item into the hands of the person you stole it from because, right, most people think this means that it's going to just sit for a while until someone can bring a clear proof. But from your perspective, you're done. Okay, I stole, I put it in the middle, I'm exempt. Now that clearly doesn't match our Mishnah because our Mishnah says it has to get into the hands of the person you stole from. In this case, it's certainly not getting there, at least not yet, and I'm fine. Rabbi Akiva Omer, lo zo derech motziata mido avera, ad sheshaleng zela lechol echad ve'echad, which could match our opinion, right? Because what does he say? You have to pay each of the 5 people. I now have to pay 5 times the amount of what I stole because there's 5 people. I don't know who I stole from, right? It's partially my fault. Like, why wasn't I paying attention? And now I have to give to each 5. Well, the problem is this, money. Rabbi Tarfon, if you're going to say Rabbi Tarfon, now the main thing is, our Mishnah distinguished whether I took an oath, then I have to get it to them. If I didn't take an oath, I don't have to. This Mishnah didn't distinguish oath or no oath. And we're going to assume the Mishnah is both if there was an oath and both if there wasn't an oath. So if that's the case, Rabbi Tarfon, now if it's Rabbi Tarfon, then it would match a case where I didn't take an oath, then I don't have to give it back to them. But but the problem, if you took an oath, according to Rabbi Tarfon, you don't have to give it back. And according to our Mishnah, you have to give it back. And Rabbi Akiva, if it's Rabbi Akiva, Rabbi Akiva didn't seem to say only if you took an oath. So Rabbi Akiva, in the case where you didn't take an oath, would not fit with our Mishnah, because he would say you still have to give it back, and here you don't have to. So it doesn't make any sense. So what we're basically going to suggest, either it's Rabbi Akiva and the Mishnah Yevamot is when you took an oath, and then it will match, or it's Rabbi Tarfon and the Mishnah and Yevamot is when you didn't take an oath, and that will match our Mishnah. But if you took an oath, you'll have to get it back. That's basically the way the Gemara is going to try to go, but both those options are going to be rejected. So we'll probably only get through Rabbi Akiva today. Let's see. Lo olam Rabbi Akiva. V'chika amar Rabbi Akiva ad sheshaleng zela lechol echad ve'echad. We can just say the Mishnah Yevamot was the case where you took an oath, and then it makes perfect sense. There you have to make sure it gets back to the one who you stole it from, and likewise our Mishnah. My time. What would be the reason to think that it's only with an oath? Because when it says this halacha that you have to get it back to him, now here we're going to see it in the pasuk, says it in Vayikra there, la'ashel hu lo yitzneru b'yom hashmato, to the one who it's his or hers, give it to on the day you're going to bring your korban asham. And they don't tell you this, but that section, as we know, was talking about where you took an oath. So you could say that's Rabbi Akiva's proof. It must be talking about when you took an oath, because that's the pasuk. Now, you have to explain Rabbi Tarfon. How's Rabbi Tarfon going to say it then? You took an oath. It says you have to give it back. Why does he say you don't? You could just leave it in the middle. Rabbi Tarfon is going to say, well, yes, the Torah really says you have to, but you know what? The rabbis were lenient here because what? You're going to have to pay 5 times what you stole? So they made a takana to make it easier for you against Torah law, right? Which happens sometimes. And now here's a proof. What we're now doing is an aside. We're going to prove why it makes sense that Rabbi Tarfon can claim there is such a takana. Because here's another takana that we do that also overrides the Torah law. Tanya, and in order to make it better, right, easier for someone to repent, goes back to things we've been talking about. Tanya, Rabbi Elazar, Rabbi Tzadok Omer, takana gdola itkinu. They made a big takana, right, to make things better. She'im hayta utzai tera ala keren. If, like I gave the example before, if I have to travel to America and pay $1,500 for a flight, when what I stole from you cost $100, then mishalem keren b'chomish lebeitin, I can just bring it to a local court, and then I can go bring my korban asham. I don't have to wait till you actually get it in hand, because I don't have to pay that much money. Okay, so again, even though theoretically I'm supposed to, I don't. Just like that, Rabbi Yishmael could say, listen, even though you took an oath, and that means you really have to make sure it gets back, you don't have to in this case. Rabbi Akiva, and now we're going to go back to Rabbi Akiva. Ki avi Rabbanit. So what's he going to say? What? Maybe there's a takana here, just like Rabbi Elazar, Rabbi Elazar, Rabbi Tzadok said. Well, no, that's different from our case. Rabbi Akiva is going to say that's a case. Now, when I give it to the court's going to somehow FedEx it, or I don't know what, get it to you over time. Okay, it just doesn't have to delay me in my tshuva. But that's because that's when I know who I stole it from, and I'm just going to send it over there, or they'll send it over. I'm done with my responsibility because I know eventually it'll get you. But I'll get it back. Because Rabbi Akiva will say, in this case, we don't know who I stole from. I'll never get it to them. That we're not going to allow. If I swore falsely and now admitted, and I want to do tshuva, my tshuva is not complete unless you actually are going to eventually receive the money, which in the case of 5 people, if I only pay one amount, you're not going to necessarily eventually receive the money. So Rabbi Yishmael will say that's a canal, just like it's there, we'll apply it here. We can be lenient. Rabbi Akiva says we can't be lenient there because the one who you stole from is never going to actually get the money. Okay, so that's, again, this was answer number one. How do we match that machloket with this? Our Mishnah is Rabbi Akiva, and Rabbi Akiva's machloket is only in the case where you took an oath. And then we explain both sides, but now we're going to prove with two sources that it can't be that the machloket Rabbi Tarfon and Rabbi Akiva is only when you took an oath. And that's going to be fairly straightforward. Mativ Rav Huna bar Yehuda. Amar Rabbi Shimon. Okay, so he's going to bring a question from the following source. Amar Rabbi Shimon ben Elazar. Lo nechleku Rabbi Tarfon v'Rabbi Akiva al shelakach echad michamisha ve'eino yodea me'ezeh mehem lakach. In the case where I purchased something from one of five of you, and I took the item, let's say the opposite of the flax case with Rav Kahana. I took the flax, but I didn't pay the money yet. And then I go to pay it. I don't remember who I bought it from. And now 5 store owners come and say, you bought the flax from me. Everyone agrees in that case. I didn't do anything wrong. I just wasn't careful enough. But therefore, I just put the money in the mill. I don't have to pay 5 times the amount. What is their machloket of what we said it is? I stole, and I don't know me'ezeh mehem gazal. In that case, Rabbi Akiva says you have to. I'm sorry, I don't have to give everybody back. And Rabbi Akiva omer ein lo takana ad sheshalem gzeila l'chol echad ve'echad. Okay, so basically the machloket is when you bought and not when you stole. I'm sorry, the machloket is when you stole and not when you bought. Now, what does this have to do with anything? Well, if you want to say Yisakadata to Ishtaba, the machloket's only when you took an oath, Mali lakach Mali gazal. Well, an oath is only relevant for theft. There's no oath relevant. It's not like I could say, I denied that I bought it and now I admit, and there's no such case. So therefore, we're assuming we're comparing lakach and gazal in the same situation, even when there is no oath. So it seems like they argue also when there is no oath. Second question, and this is a kind of funny one. Od mativ rava maaseh b'chasid echad. There was a chassid who took something from one of 2 people, and he's not sure who he got it from. Okay, he bought it. Okay, this is a case where he bought it, not where he stole it. And he goes to Rabbi Tarfon. Rabbi Tarfon says, put the money down and go. It's enough. Now, Rabbi Akiva says, no, you have to give back to both of them. You have to pay money to both. Now, if you think that it's only in a case where, now this would seem like they did argue in a case of lakach. If you think it's only where they took a false oath, and that's what we said, chassid mi mishtaba b'shikra. A chassid doesn't take an oath falsely. They're a chassid. That's the whole point of being a chassid. That's why I said it's kind of funny answer. Story started with a chassid, a pious person. And maybe you'll say, it's why it gets even funnier, maybe they lied falsely and then became a chassid later. Or Rabbi Yehuda ben Bava, or Rabbi Yehuda bar Rabbi Eli. You can read more about Rabbi Yehuda bar Rabbi Eli on Shuli Mishkan's post this week in flashback. But now we're going to say the following. Anytime it says Maaseh b'chasid echad, they're not talking about a random chassid. It's either Rabbi Yehuda ben Bava or Rabbi Yehuda bar Rabbi Eli. And it's known that Rabbi Yehuda ben Bava, Rabbi Yehuda bar Rabbi Eli, chasidim t'mei karahavu. They are known to, they weren't people who at some point had a bad, evil past. So can't be that's the case. So what do we prove here? These 2 sources both show that you can't say the machloket is about a case where they took an oath and want to now do tshuva. It's even in a case where there's no oath, which means that, or it's at least in a case where there's no oath, because it could be maybe only in a case where there's no oath, but then Rabbi Akiva can't fit with our Mishnah, because we tried to say it's Rabbi Akiva and it's the Mishnah there is only about taking an oath, and Rabbi Akiva would agree if there's no oath, then he would agree with Rabbi Tarfon, but that's not true. So we're off with that. Tomorrow we're going to try to say maybe the machloket is only when you don't take an oath and then it matches Rabbi Yishmael. Okay, and then we're going to reject that as well, and then we'll come up with a third explanation. So that's it for today. Bit of a long daf, but basically the beginning part we already reviewed, and this part was really, the simple structure was, we're just trying to figure out who the author of this Mishnah is. Once it becomes clear that the Mishnah is only in a case where you take an oath, you don't take an oath, you don't have to actually get the money back to the one you stole it from, and that doesn't seem to match either Rabbi Yishmael or Rabbi Akiva, because they seem to have a machloket in both cases. And then we're going to see, is that really the case? We tried to say maybe they don't argue in both cases, but we rejected our first possibility. That's it for today. Wishing everybody a great day.